Yes, I was just on mute. I see more people joining, so I'm actually going to wait for the organizers to just let me know when's a good time to get going.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is Vijay, your host for today's masterclass, which is on understanding business model. And yes, we have Ash Maurya with us. I don't think Ash needs much of introduction, but still, I would like to tell everyone that at Vadwani Foundation, Ash's contribution is great, and our course revolves around his lean canvas and business model. So today we are really privileged to have Ash with us, and we'll be doing deep dive into his tool, which is lean canvas and business model. So stage is all yours, Ash. Thank you so much for joining in. So let's get started.
All right, thank you, Vijaya. Let me just share my screen here. 1 second. Okay, I believe you should all see my screen. Get back there. Okay, so let's kick things off. My name is Ash Maurya. I'm going to be walking through the Lean Canvas, but I wanted to kind of keep this as interactive as possible. So along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to start posting those either in the chat window or the Q&A window. And it looks like a lot of you are already quite experienced with Zoom, so it shouldn't be an issue. So I'll kind of be watching those. I'll also come back and answer any questions. I know a number of you have been working with the Lean Canvas, maybe have been using the Running Lean book. So I want to focus more on what's happened since then. So the book is almost 10 years old. So there are lots of optimizations and kind of new thinking. So I want to bring some of that to light today in how we teach this. So that's what we'll be talking about. And then I'm not going to take a deep dive necessarily into all the boxes. I want to emphasize some of the more important ones, which I consider foundational, but I want to answer as many questions. So if there's any questions on the boxes, we'll have time at the end where you can come in, and I'll spend as much time on any of the other boxes as you need. So let's kind of kick things off. So I'm going to do a quick kind of presentation of 3 top pitfalls that I see people struggling with, and then we'll take all the time needed to answer your questions in the remaining 30, 40 minutes that we'll have. So many of you know the reason we're here. We are trying to build better products. And one of the things I learned from my own experiences as an entrepreneur is that ideas seem very appealing, very exciting, very tempting in the early days. And we kind of jump all in, but the top mistake that many entrepreneurs make is this one, is we, at the end of the day, build the wrong product and kind of waste a lot of time, money, and effort along the way, focusing on that wrong product. And unfortunately, by that time, resources are expended and we either don't have any more pivots left in us, and so we kind of give up, or a competitor takes over and takes the market. So we want to kind of avoid that. And so a lot of what we have been talking about conversationally in the lean startup world has been techniques and ways of doing this. So one of those tools, it's not the only one, but one of those tools is this one. And it's essentially, as some of you have experienced, it's a rapid idea capture tool. So unlike building a big business plan, which we know is very hard to create in the early stages because we don't know what we don't know, we use a tool like this one to deconstruct our thinking, and at least we can then have some starting plan. And that's what the Lean Canvas really is. One of the things I will say is that it's important to revisit this on a regular cadence because ideas will inevitably change. That's one of the mistakes I see people making, is they do the canvas once and then they don't keep it up to date. So that's something just to keep in mind, is that it's important every now and then. And if you time box this with maybe a 1-month window, put on your calendar, set an appointment, just give yourself a reminder to go back and reread your canvas and make sure it's up to date at least. That will help in keeping yourself accountable. So as I said, I'm going to come back and dive into some of these boxes based on your questions, but the top 3 pitfalls I wanted to start with were these ones. So I want to first talk about this notion of the innovator's bias. I'll kind of describe and define what that is and how to overcome it, some of the things to do on the canvas to overcome this. We'll talk about jobs to be done. So I know just from preparing for this webinar, I know many of you are using jobs to be done and some of the value proposition canvases. And so I want to talk about this particular problem and how it manifests itself and how to potentially overcome it. So too many of us think we know what the right job to be done is, and then we get stuck. Want to make sure I can see some comments about screens and things. I want to make sure everyone is good, and maybe it's just a local issue. But okay, so we'll talk about kind of jobs to be done, and then the last piece is more about this notion of kind of experiments. And I'm just going to lay out how to think about validation, but we'll again leave that to any tactical questions that you guys may want to ask. So let's start with the innovator's bias. So the innovator's bias to me is this premature passion or love for the solution. And all entrepreneurs have this, all innovators have this. I have this, I had this. So any maker that's building something kind of has this disproportionate passion for the product, and the product being the solution. And this is just something to be aware of. It's not something that you can just kind of wash away. You just have to remind yourself constantly that you are going to be biased. And so you have to bring extra emphasis or extra mindfulness to the way you're validating your idea. The way this unconsciously manifests itself is even when people create the canvas, while some of the instructions that you might have seen either online or in my books to start with customers and problems, some of the challenges that people kind of run into is they do this. So they will start with the solution in mind and build the rest of the canvas from there. And this is what we sometimes call the hammer problem. So if you've already decided you want to build a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Instead of asking yourself, which markets can I go after? Which customer problem do I solve? You instead ask yourself, which customers could use this hammer that I want to build? And what can I do with this hammer for them? And those are all, typically challenging things, because you will bias yourself, and then your idea is now again a solution-centric canvas versus being a pure customer problem-centric canvas. So this is the inventing or faking problems. Now, if you go and do the right kind of validation afterwards, you go and do the work and don't suffer from other kinds of biases like confirmation bias, or which is essentially listening to what you want to hear from customers or asking leading questions, you can course correct. And if you are kind of rigorous, you can do that. But even in the early stages, one of the things that I stress that people focus in on is these 2 boxes particularly. So when I work with teams, I tell them, go fill out the full canvas. But what I want to really focus in on is how much do they really know about customers and problems before anything else. So I even bring things like team considerations and pricing and other things later on. I first want to narrow in on what we have been calling now the leaner canvas. So I don't know if any of you have run into this, but about a year and a half ago, we almost kind of condensed this canvas out and made this a tool of itself. And it works quite well. So even if people start here, it's even faster to fill out, but it allows a coach or an advisor. When I work with teams, I play that role. It allows me to really start seeing where is this idea coming from. So let's kind of let's kind of walk through what I'm really looking for. So when I look at the leaner canvas, the first question here is, who is the customer? Sounds very obvious, but in ideas that have many actors, it is important to understand who is going to be paying you at the end of the day. So the customer is the one that pays. Everyone else is a user or a buyer or something else in that product, maybe a channel partner, and you need to label them appropriately. It's important to identify the different roles, and there is no such thing as a free user. People tell me, I've got free users and paying users, and I tell them that even free users are paying you. Just think of Facebook. We all use Facebook, but we give Facebook our data, we give them our attention, and they monetize that. So there is no such thing as a free user. So we need to identify the roles. So that's why this is important. How will you qualify, identify early adopters? Here I'm looking for more psychographics than demographics. So people tell me I'm looking for people who have this problem, or people who are struggling with this kind of thing. Those to me are not targetable. So almost think about a Facebook ad. If you were going to run, it doesn't have to be Facebook, it could be Google, but Facebook has a lot of targeting. But think about running an ad for your ideal early adopter. What could you target? What would be the interests or the behaviors or the triggers that you would target? That's what I want to see. So again, what I'm doing here for all of you is kind of showing you how you can tighten down the lean canvases that you have. When we go on the left-hand side, I want to understand problems, but not in the context of what you think you can do with your solution. I want to understand what's broken today. So this might help. Too many people, when they're asked to think of problems, go and try to think of new problems to solve. But all the problems we're solving are already out there. This is this other kind of premise of the innovator's gift, is that we aren't trying to solve new problems. We're really trying to solve old problems that are created by existing solutions. And so when you come back to this canvas, I want to really understand, before you tell me what you are building, tell me what are customers using today. So that's the existing alternative. And I want to see evidence of that. How do you know that? So too often in the early stages, we just guess at these things and we never come back and revisit them. So if you are following the process and you are doing the problem interviews and going out and talking to customers, you want to make sure that you are getting a shorter, tighter list of your existing alternatives. And you need to be able to point to those and say, these are what my customers are using. And then we can talk about problems. So what's broken with them? So again, simple example, if we look at ride sharing or Uber, what's the existing alternative? If I had to get to the airport, I could drive, I could take a bus, I could maybe take a bicycle, not very practical, or take a taxi. And so all those are alternatives, and we need to see, given all those alternatives, why does Uber or a ride sharing service compete, and why does it need to exist? Like, why is it better than those? So again, don't just think of problems that you can solve for your customers at this 3,000 foot level. Try to make it more specific to the existing alternatives out there. And there's always going to be an existing alternative. And this is, again, a principle from Jobs to be Done, which I'll touch on a little bit. The other piece over here is that just with this leaner canvas, some of you may have run into this picture. This is the innovation trinity from design thinking. So when we look at ideas, we want to look at it from these three lenses: desirability, viability, feasibility. For ideas today, not all of them, but most of them, feasibility is not the riskiest thing. We can typically build most things given enough time, money, and effort. The bigger challenge is going to be, do people care, and can we build a business around it? So again, when I'm looking at even the leaner canvas, I'm trying to see, can you show me evidence that there's desirability? And if we just go back to that picture, desirability, you can answer by showing me evidence that people are buying something, people are using something, I should say. There's a problem to be solved, and there is evidence, people have to get to the airport, they are hiring taxis, they don't want to drive because they don't want to pay for parking. So I get that. So I want to see that that there is an alternative and there are customers doing this. If we look at the second question here, viability, which is how does this business work? Notice in this leaner canvas, there is no revenue stream box, there is no pricing discussion, but you don't need it to talk about viability. The best evidence of viability is money being spent today. If you can show me an existing alternative that exists, that's a good sign, because it means that people are doing something. At a minimum, they're spending time and effort. But even better, if they are spending money on the existing alternative, that creates anchors for your pricing. And this is, again, anchored based pricing based on existing alternatives and value versus trying to think of cost-based pricing, which is your solution. Too many people will tell me I need to talk about solution before I can talk about pricing. And I think that's backwards. Customers don't care what your solution costs. They care about their problems and what it costs them in the long run. So if the problem is a $1,000 problem, they are willing to spend anything up to that amount to make that problem go away. And the best way to find that is tell me what these existing alternatives cost. So if your existing alternatives are all free, too many startups get killed by email or spreadsheets because they're competing. They think they're competing, with some fancy collaboration or analytics software out there. But if people are predominantly using email and spreadsheets, guess what? That's who you're competing against. And if that's free, you have a long uphill battle because you have to convince the customer to spend money when they're not today spending money. So those are how we, just using the leaner canvas, we can really tighten down. And this, by the way, is the foundation of the lean canvas. If these 4 boxes are in a much better place, then all the other boxes automatically start adjusting. Because once your customer segmentation is correct, once your problems are correct, your solution gets to be in a better place, your channels, your pricing, as you can see, everything links off of this. So when people don't really have, I look at these 4 boxes like a jigsaw puzzle, they have to fit together. When they don't fit together very well, then we challenge the teams to try to find, go and do some more problem discovery, go and do some more validation to make sure they can come and tighten these boxes down. So that's a little bit about the leaner canvas and how I kind of hone in on that. So irrespective of where the startup is, what stage they're in, they may be launching, they may be in ideation, they may already have some customers. I always go back to just this macro kind of view of the lean canvas, the leaner canvas, and try to make them really tell me what they know and why they know this. And that will just make your canvas a lot stronger. Let's talk about jobs to be done. So I think jobs to be done is fascinating. I ran into it many, many years ago, but the challenge I always had is it felt like a magic trick. When I knew the job to be done, I saw all these case studies, the milkshake example, I'm sure some of you have run into those. When you knew the job to be done, you could go and use that framework to come up with a lot of insights. The challenge, of course, is getting there. So I call it a magic trick because, like a magic trick, if you have ever practiced magic as a kid, once you know the secret, everything is obvious and you can kind of see how it works, and it's kind of trivial, but getting to that is the hard part. And so for me, trying to find the right job to be done is really where the challenge lies. And I'm going to illustrate this with an example and then talk about some ways you can overcome this. In the job to be done world, I don't know which framework you're using, but generally all of them generally point to this code. So there is the 1/4 inch drill bit, code from Theodore Levitt. People don't want a 1/4 inch drill bit, they want a 1/4 inch hole. So if we ask ourselves, what's the job to be done here? It's very tempting for people to gravitate to the obvious job to be done, which is people want to drill a hole. And then we start exploring that, right? So people want to drill a hole, that's what they want. They don't want the drill bit, which is the solution. They want what we do with it, which is the hole. So let's look for problems. And when we look at this picture, we can find a lot of problems. We might find that these drill bits are breaking when you drill into harder surfaces. We might find, mess. Even drilling a hole can be challenging. Where do you drill it? You need a measuring tape. Maybe the drill bit can have some tools or a laser pointer, to make sure the hole is level. There's so many things you can start imagining as an entrepreneur on how to make the job of drilling a hole better. The problem, of course, is that may not be the right job to be going after. So you'll see how this manifests itself shortly. But if I was a drill bit manufacturer, or if I just study the job, if I go in saying the job is drilling a better hole, I will come up with all kinds of things, and I might launch a product like this one. I might say the problem that I see most people running into is when they drill into harder surfaces, their drill bit is breaking. So let's just make a stronger drill bit. Let's go and build this titanium-based tip for a drill bit, and it'll be 40% stronger. It won't break as much. And that would be great. So we launched this, and things look good for a while until we start getting disrupted, until we start getting different products come in. So let's see how that happens. The first thing I will say is that what I just did there was pick a job to be done, which I don't think you can do. You can't use a value proposition canvas. We have another canvas, the customer forces canvas. You can't guess at the job to be done. You can't ask yourself, what do I think the job to be done is? You have to go and discover it. You have to do this through interviewing. You have to think of the bigger scope or the bigger context. And so we'll kind of see what that means. So one of the challenges here is that when we look at people is too broad. So we have to narrow that down. I can't just go and look at everyone looking at using a drill bit. I need to segment. So on the lean canvas, I might break this particular problem or this particular domain into homeowners and maybe construction workers. And so that's how I might segment. But the thing that I have most issue with this code, so this, by the way, very powerful code. It changed marketing when it came out. Think in terms of benefits and not features, but it still didn't go far enough. And the reason it didn't go far enough is that the bottom of the code says people want a 1/4 inch hole, which gives the impression that that's what we need to optimize for. But that, I would argue, is not a desired outcome. That is a functional outcome. And again, if you are following jobs to be done, you might be labeling jobs into functional and emotional. I don't care about functional jobs. I actually ignore functional jobs because the ideal job should actually have no work. The ideal job, and we as humans are lazy by nature. We want the job done with no effort. So the more you can eliminate functional jobs, the better. You kind of want to know they exist, but you want to overcome them. You want to instead focus in on the emotional job, or what is it that people really want. So wants and not needs. So when I look at this code, it seems to suggest that I should optimize the drilling of a hole, but I don't know anyone, maybe you do, but I don't know anyone who has brought me into their house and showed me this wall and said, come and look at this perfectly round, beautiful hole that I have just drilled with this drill bit. That's not what they show me. They show me something else. They show me what goes on top of that hole. And that is where we start getting into desired outcomes. So to me, this by itself, not enough. You have to search for the bigger context. And where this all ties in is that even on the lean canvas, if you look at the value proposition box, it's again very tempting to say, I solve this problem for this customer. And so you might land on a very functional value proposition, which is often not big enough. You have to look at a bigger context. You have to kind of figure out what is it that customers ultimately want. So when we look at this idea of the bigger context, you find that the features and benefits, the needs kind of live at the product level, the tool level, but the bigger context is where you find these desired outcomes. And that's what you really want to be chasing. So let me share this example and kind of go a bit further. If I was exploring this, I would talk to people. So I might do my lean canvas. I might not, I wouldn't presuppose I know what the job to be done is. I would go and interview some homeowners who just bought a drill bit. And I would want to ask them, why do they buy this drill bit? And they would tell me they want to drill a hole. So it's very functional. I know that the hole is not the desired outcome. That is an intermediate step. So what would you do next? And if they were being very literal, which I want them to be, they would tell me, well, the next thing I'm going to do is secure a hook on the wall. And then I would ask them, well, why are they doing that? And this is, again, through an interviewing process. I would then recognize that they are ultimately trying to hang a painting, and a smile might come on their face. And this is when I know that I've hit some emotion. When people stop talking about the mechanics of the job to be done, but more about some of the results, that's when you know you have hit the right scope, maybe. So they tell me they're hanging a painting. So we have gone from a very functional thing, which was drill bits and hardware, all of a sudden now to art. So I might start exploring a little bit further there. And as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, I now want to ask myself, if this user, this customer wants to hang a painting, how could I get them to that outcome without any of the undesired effects? Drilling a hole, complicated, making a mess, all those things were complicated or undesired. How could I get rid of them? And this is where I might go away and come back with a product like this one. So this is mounting tape made by 3M, as you can see. You can even see the job to be done, the use case right in the packaging there, right that in the picture. You can see a bunch of tools hung on some kind of a wall or a garage shed. This is essentially the job to be done, but it's how a product like this one, which is glue, can compete with a drill bit. And this is more kind of jobs to be done thinking that takes more discovery, more imagination, more creativity than just chasing functional jobs. So this is an example that I kind of like to use because it shows how you can start by studying what customers are doing, but just by broadening the scope, trying to get not to an intermediate step, but to a desired outcome, you can then begin to come up with entirely new product categories. So this is not in the same category at all, but if you go to the hardware store, it is marketed next to the drill bit on purpose because they are competing against each other. So this is just one level. And the power of this kind of thinking is that there is no end. I mean, there is an end you'll see, but you can go up a level higher. So if I realize I'm talking to some homeowners who are hanging paintings in their house, I might ask them a little bit more about art. They might talk about how they buy art and how they get bored with them, how they every now and then want to change their artwork. And I might go away and come back with a different product. I might come up with a product like this one. Now, this looks like a painting on a wall, but if you actually read this copy, some of you might know this product, some of you might own this product. This is actually a flat screen TV made by Samsung. They call it the frame because it looks like a picture frame. It's been designed to flush mount onto the wall. It's got some smart lighting. So when you're in the room, it turns on. When you're out of the room, it turns off. Their tagline is TV when it's on, art when it's off. So you can turn it into a painting. So instead of staring at an ugly black screen, which most of us do with a TV hanging on a wall, we can now have a pretty emotional use case for this, which is put some paintings up there. As you will see, there's subscribe to the art store kind of below in that landing page. They'll even sell you a subscription, which is a way for them to generate recurring revenue once they made their TV sale, where you can put up masterpiece artwork. You can, of course, upload your own, but it's even easier if you kind of put up different paintings and you can kind of change this all up. So this, again, is this idea of think of the bigger context. This was a homeowner who wanted to hang a painting, showed up to the hardware store, was struggling to find a drill bit. Maybe the clerk told them there's this glue you can use. And then as the clerk starts talk to this person, he might realize that this is actually an art lover, and he might just suggest, do you know there's this kind of frame TV in the back there, you can go and take a look. And guess what happens? This homeowner that went there to buy a $20 drill bit walks out with $20 glue instead and a $2,000 TV and does not buy the drill bit. This is the power of this kind of thinking. So as an entrepreneur, you want to figure out when you're doing your discovery work, before presupposing what the job to be done is, this is the challenge of scoping, is you want to make sure that you are scoping at the right level, because if you pigeonhole yourself to just the drill bit category, you can get disrupted very easily. In this case, the drill bit category is still very functional. It's still very much of a sustaining type of innovation, not the kind of exciting, disruptive innovation we want to create as startups. So you have to think bigger. Now, there is a limit, of course. If you keep going, as with 5 whys, 5 whys is this technique where we are broadening the questioning. But if you keep asking your customers, why do you want this? Why are you doing this? At some point, things can get very metaphysical. You can confuse them and they get very uncomfortable because you're starting to ask the meaning of life. So we don't want to go all the way up to what is the meaning of life, but most entrepreneurs that I talk to stay stuck in their category. If you're building software, we think we're competing against software. If you build hardware, we think we're in the hardware space. You need to let go of that. So forget about the solution and start to think about customers and what are they really trying to do. That's where you find these bigger contexts. That's where you find the power of kind of thinking bigger. This is a way to think of it. So don't put yourself in the mind of you, the entrepreneur, and your product. Think of the customer and what they are trying to do. So this was a code I ran into that changed my perspective entirely. So today we build all kinds of things. I build software, I write books, we build posters. There was a game that we almost built. So it doesn't really matter what solution we build, as long as we know who our customer is and what they are trying to really accomplish. So don't build a better X, build a better user of that X. The way this gets applied in the example I just showed is don't build a better drill bit, build a better homeowner if that's the customer segment you're going after. And even in this picture, even though I kind of showed some of these different products, there's a place for everyone to coexist. So if I were a drill bit manufacturer and I realized that a lot of new homeowners are actually struggling, they're drilling holes in the wrong places, they're coming to patch the walls, they're getting very frustrated. Well, I might offer training. I might say, come into the hardware store and we have got this workshop area where we'll give you free classes. You can come and practice with our drill bits and drill all the holes you want. And when you're comfortable, then go to your nice, pretty, pristine drywall in your new home and drill holes there, right? So I don't have to go and invent the TV. I don't have to go and build this new innovative thing. I can just understand what my customers are trying to do and make them better at that job versus trying to just sell them more of my solution, brute force that. And as you saw, if you're a startup, you actually have a lot more, but I would say a lot less boundaries, a lot more possibilities. You can operate in any one of these spaces. The danger, of course, is you try to do everything. So this is where you as a startup also need to recognize that there are certain core competencies, there are certain skills or skill sets or problem areas that you are most passionate about. And so bring that into your constrained process. Don't try to do everything, because no one can do all the jobs in the beginning. So you have to figure out where are you competing. So in this, there were 3 levels I showed. Of course, there are many, many levels in here, but I talked about working at the drill bit level, talked about working at the art level. I talked about working at the TV or entertainment level. And you can kind of see how those were 3 products, but there can be many other types of products. So I just see a question about 5 whys or 7 whys. So to me, it's not so much about the number. Sometimes all you can do is 3 whys. So the reason that we find, or 5 whys got codified by Toyota, so Toyota is the one who came up with that, is that usually after 5 whys, things start getting, as I said, pretty metaphysical, and you get more answers. You already have more work than you can do. Here, I only did, maybe 3 or 4 kind of leveling ups. So I would say go as far as you need to, but unlike a 3-year-old, you have to stop at some point. If you keep asking whys, people get very, very confused about what you're really asking them. So it doesn't have to be, but it's definitely not 1 why. That's what I would say. So it's not 1 why. I would say try to get to a minimum 3, and if you can go up to 7, great, but I find that can be challenging in certain instances. Okay, so we talked about the drill bit. Think about the homeowner. So this is this notion of bigger context. So when you're thinking of your value proposition, don't be pigeonholed to just solution context. Think about desired outcomes. Think about emotion. Think about wants versus needs. If you can solve for a want, when I work with entrepreneurs, I have this lean canvas tool. I don't tell them lean canvas versus business plan. That's very functional. I want to instead think about, all of you here are trying to build the next big startup or a big startup. That is the emotional job to be done. And some of you want to raise funding. Some of you want to get traction. To me, those are where I find more energy, where I find passion, where I find real obstacles and problems. And that's what I want to understand. And that's how I want to position my products. So the lean canvas is not better than the business model canvas, or it's not better than the business plan. Those are all very boring things. The more interesting thing is what you do afterwards. And so if I can get you thinking about those things and get you excited about those things, I can get more adoption for even my own product. So that's generally how I apply this and how it could be helpful to think along with your own products. So last piece here, this one I'm not going to spend a lot of time, because again, as I said, I want to leave some time for questions. Some of you who are already following the process know this, but I just want to re-emphasize that business modeling is step 1. So we want to make sure that our idea, the whole tightening that I talked about, the business model is a tool. Just like scientists use models to make predictions. They start with a model, and you can run a lot of simulations to see what will happen. We make some predictions, but the real learning comes from what happens in the real world. So think of the lean canvas. Don't spend a lot of time trying to just on paper make it better. You can do some of these tightening things I talked about, but the moment you start guessing and you start going in 5 or 6 different directions, it's time to kind of stop and really get outside the building. Figuratively speaking, sometimes you don't have to literally get out. You can do a lot of experiments while you're inside, which unfortunately is where a lot of us are stuck today, but you can still do a lot of experimenting. But this is where you want to prioritize the right kinds of things. So when we talked about the canvas, getting evidence of problems and solutions and existing alternatives, tightening that down. So that's an example of prioritize. Don't get stuck into building an MVP or launching your product. First, get the basics right. So get the foundation right, then run some experiments. And the experiments is where you get the feedback loop of whether your initial assumptions were right or not. And if not a problem. If you can do this very quickly, it's perfectly okay to change your canvases. All my canvases look drastically different from the first version that I create. I always create a first canvas, but after 2 or 3 weeks when I look at it, sometimes it's unrecognizable because I've been doing a lot of this validation, and that is healthy and very, very typical. So that's kind of where I will leave this, is that idea validation is way more important than just the idea generation or even creating a nice, beautiful lean canvas. The lean canvas is just step number one. So this is where I will invite you. I'm going to look through the questions you have. So we'll go into the question piece. We have some resources if you are inclined, if you haven't checked them out. We have some foundational content that's available for free on LeanStack. You can definitely go check those out. A lot of the tools as well are online, but there's some newer content we have put out that kind of cover some of these things we talked about. There are some more mindsets and ways to think about prioritizing your lean canvas. There are 10, today I covered 3 pitfalls. There are 10 pitfalls that I cover in this course it's a free course that we give, that we provide. So it may be worth checking out. So this is where I'm going to look through the questions that are on here. We've got maybe 20, 25 minutes left. And if there are any other questions about specific boxes that you are struggling with or want me to cover, now is where I'll kind of start diving into the canvas. Okay, so let me see. So I see a question from Mohammed. How often should we ask the customers about the problem and the solution? So the short answer is until you get the consistent answers. And it doesn't take very long. So if you really narrow down your customer segment and you even run 5 or 10 interviews, oftentimes you can predict what people are going to say before they say it. So when I was in running Lean, I talked about this photo sharing app. I was working with wedding photographers. Really, after doing 5 to 10 interviews, I was hearing the same stories. People were telling me about the same things they were doing. I knew the same tools they were using, more or less the same tools, running into the same kinds of issues. At that point, you stop and you shift gears into how can I build up something that I can go back and show them that can solve those problems. So that's kind of the qualitative answer is once you can start to get those predictive powers, that's when you know that you should shift to the next stage. Now, at the end of the day, you have to, when you show people your solution, people have to commit. The best commitment is paying you money. So saying, I want this, here's my money, take it now. That's not always practical, but you need to figure out some other call to action, some other measurable action that people can take when you go back to them. Even if it's signing up for your trial, that's better than nothing. So you have to have a real concrete action. And that's the way we know that what we have learned, the insights we have gathered and turned into a offer or a product are really the right ones, is when people vote with their actions. Okay, so this is a question from Sriram about, I guess, the differences between business model canvas and lean canvas. When should we really prepare a business model canvas? So again, the thing that I like to say is that there are 2 different paradigms. I used to have a slide where I contrasted the differences, but I'll just talk through them. There are 2 different paradigms. Before I used to tell people that the business model canvas is better at modeling more existing businesses because there are a lot of boxes on there, like key resources and partnerships and things like that, which for a startup, you really don't have any of those. And the bigger challenge for a startup or even in a big company, people who are building a new product out of nothing, building a new innovative product, they really can't leverage on the existing resources. The job of an entrepreneur is to create something new out of nothing. And so I found that in those environments, the paradigm is less about what existing stuff do I have and more about the basics. So who is the customer? What's the problem? What's the solution? And that triad, that triangle kind of creates the foundation for creating new value. So that's why I was using the business model canvas, but found, at least for my 3 products, the canvases were exactly or mostly similar because I was talking about the same resources and the same partnerships and the same things I would eventually build. And it was not that actionable. And so I created the lean canvas, which is a lot more bottoms up. Now I say that, so the lean canvas for one has more appeal in the earlier stages when you're building something new and different that people haven't seen before. But we've also worked with bigger companies, and we find that even in latter stages, as companies start doing release planning, we have product managers, for instance, that are gravitating towards the lean canvas because it's more of a maker canvas. If you build product, you like to see a solution box. On the business model canvas, it's a business document. You don't see the solution box. And so it always feels like this is for business people, and the product people don't actually want to use this. But the lean canvas kind of has this appeal where it talks about business models, but it's the best of both worlds in a way. So again, that's been our experience. But at the end of the day, I tell people that there are two different paradigms. We don't try to convince anyone to use one versus the other. We actually instead encourage you to use both and find which one appeals with your thinking. Just like we have visual thinkers and non-visual thinkers, we similarly have people who naturally gravitate towards Coke or Pepsi or lean canvas or business model canvas. And there's a place for both. So that's where I'll leave it at. So I see maybe from an anonymous attendee, I have my own idealism for starting the business, but most people didn't need that. How do you solve it? So again, the challenge that we all have as entrepreneurs is what we see, unfortunately, is what others don't see. And that's just the nature of new ideas. It's not just you. Look at Airbnb, look at Facebook. In the early days, none of them could actually raise money. None of them could actually get attention. Facebook, because they were doing this small thing on a social network in a college campus, while there were other social networks that already had millions of users and millions of dollars in funding. What is one college student going to do to disrupt them or to make a dent? So nobody paid attention to Mark Zuckerberg in the early days. So he had to go and find a way to show traction. Airbnb, the same thing. They had a lot of risk. Would you want to live in a stranger's house? Would somebody want a stranger to come into their house while they're in there? There are too many risks involved. And so lots of very smart investors walked away. So that's just the nature of ideas. They all sound a little bit crazy. They all sound like they will not work in the early stages. Your job as an entrepreneur is to systematically prove people wrong and sometimes prove yourself wrong. And that's also a very healthy exercise. So that's why the canvas helps. It helps you prioritize. So first lay your idea out, deconstruct it, prioritize what might be the thing that fails. That's the riskiest assumption thinking. Not the thing that I want to do, which is build the product, but what is the thing that most people will say, this is the thing that will make you fail. This will not work. Go and prove people wrong, or go and find evidence otherwise. If you can do that, that's what we call traction. The best way to do it is to get customers, is to get interest, is to get people wanting or using or understanding what you're doing. So that's what we teach. When we teach all of this stuff, it all starts with traction. It all starts with being able to put your idea in language that your customers understand. If customers understand this, then investors understand this. If investors understand this, co-founders understand this. You start to build the ecosystem around yourself. So that maybe helps. That's kind of at a high level how I would tackle that question. So I see Dion asking again, to reach the bigger context. I think I answered this question, but I'll just reframe it again. To reach the bigger context from functional problem, how many whys we need to ask ideally. So you need to ask enough whys till you hit an emotional outcome, kind of that want, that desired outcome. So again, when you're working, if you're doing a big enterprise product, it's very typical that you're going to spend a lot of whys, because you find maybe the salespeople are generating leads. Well, why are they generating leads? Because they want to make sales. Why do they want to make sales? Of course, the business wants to work. So I might go back into what's wrong with leads, what's the process. So I might find a lot of things they're doing. And so it may not, in that case, just be 5 whys. And also whys can be very aggressive. So I don't want to make it sound like you literally go to your customer and ask them why 5 times. So this is where tactics and principles kind of vary. If you go and ask a customer 5 whys to their face, it's very aggressive. It's very much like an interrogation. You'll kind of scare them away, or they'll get very defensive. So you have to soften that. So instead of why, ask them how and what. So, how did you do this, or what were you trying to accomplish? So if someone says, I put this lead into the system, well, why was that? Or instead of why, what was the goal? Like why, and you're trying to get to the why, but you're not necessarily hitting them up with the why. So those are like softer ways of getting to it. But what you want to do is eventually reach a point where you can get an aha moment, where you can see something happening that's more of that desired outcome, not the not the making of the product, not the intermediate steps, but when you hit that first one. And if you can go 1 or 2 levels higher from there, even better. So that's where I would generally go. So Hilda is asking, can we start from early adopters? Why to involve better the job to be done? And there we go to other parts of the leaner canvas. So the answer absolutely is yes. So I think the question was, do we start with early adopters and question them? That is who we want to do in the early stages. So when I looked at that leaner canvas, which is just the sub-segment of the customer segment and problem canvas, where we do want to start is in the early adopter space. But also remember that your early adopter definition, when you are initially creating your lean canvas, is also a guess. So you also have to go and validate that. So when I run these first sprints and encourage others to do so, I tell them, go and talk to who you think your early adopters are on your canvas. But if you don't know that to be absolutely certain or true, then talk to a few more people. So I was once working with the team, they were trying to build a chemical-free detergent. And so they said our early adopters are people who buy, organic detergent for washing their clothes and no chemicals, and they're kind of in the space. And I'm like, all that is great, but the danger of going narrow is that your product may actually have wider appeal than you think. And if you narrow yourself now, you may miss out the other segments. So in the first phase, I would tell them, go and talk to anybody that has recently purchased detergent, organic or inorganic, chemical-free or not, and do some interviews. And after you run a handful of interviews, if you still believe that the people who have a worldview of no chemicals or chemicals being bad is your early adopter, then double down on that segment. But cast that wider net in the beginning. So that's, again, something we do, and we do this to avoid the local maxima trap. So again, going too tunnel visioned or too narrow, you kind of miss a much bigger opportunity in the process. So to answer your question, absolutely, we need to go after early adopters, but that in itself is a discovery process. So if you take this healthy mindset that everything you all have on your lean canvas without any validation, without doing any of this, talking to customers or problem discovery piece is a guess. And some of those could be right, some of them could be wrong, but you have to go and show evidence for all of them. So again, when I coach teams, I don't take anything on faith, even though things seem very, very obvious. It's like, I can see how logically this should be your early adopter, but what have you done to validate that? So that would be the question I would ask. So we almost want to have beginner's mind. In science, we call those first principles. We want to make sure that everything we are putting out there, as basic as it sounds, there is some anecdotal evidence or sufficient conversation that's been had, an experiment that's been run where you can point to tell me that I've checked this and it truly is what we say it is. So that's what I would say on that. So I see a question about student housing stuck with sales. How do we grow sales? To me, that's a bit broader if you can more narrow it down. So sales, obviously a very big topic. Your question is too broad for me to be able to give a very specific answer. So if there's a more specific challenge, it can help with answering. Okay, so this is Abdul Rahim. Hani is asking about finding suitable team members. So you have done a model, you haven't found suitable team members yet. So co-founders, how do you find them? So first of all, finding co-founders is a long process. You have to, it's sometimes people draw the analogy to getting married. You have to build a relationship and kind of work with each other before you decide you want to settle down together. Co-founding a company is no different. It's something you're going to do for the long haul. So don't rush it. So it does take time. What helps? So from a practical perspective, when I get this question asked, I tell people, be on the lookout, put yourself out there, use your networks, tell people what you're working on. And if you're looking for someone technical, appeal, hit into your networks and look for certain skill sets, and all those things should be happening in parallel. But the thing that you can do that is going to be most effective is, again, trying to show that your idea is worth pursuing. If I went to if I wanted to attract a top developer, software developer, for instance, and they look at my idea and I have no customers, it's going to be very hard for them to quit their day job unless they see what I see. So unless they believe in what I'm doing, it's going to be very hard for them to give up their high-paying salary. And so the more I can de-risk that, and that is what the job of the founder is. You have to de-risk your idea to your co-founders, to your team members, to your customers, and eventually investors if you're going to raise money. That's what we really do. The best way, again, to do that is to start making forward progress. So the running lean book and methodologies like the lean startup help you in going and showing that there is interest, there is demand, there are problems to be solved here, there are customer segments that want this. You can show evidence of trials or funding from customers, maybe advance payments or things like that. Those are all things. So just to put it in perspective, if I go and talk to somebody, maybe that top hotshot developer, and I tell them, here's my idea, here's my lean canvas, come and join me, they have to take a big leap of faith that all of this stuff is going to work. But if instead I can go back to them and say, here's my big idea, and by the way, I've actually gone and gotten 10 people to pre-commit, 10 big customers who said, if you build this, and I've showed them a demo, I can show him a demo as well. They said, if you build this, we would buy it, and here's the pricing, here's a letter of intent, here's the pilot proposal. That changed the conversation entirely. Now it's much easier for that hotshot developer to take a leap of faith because they can see that this is already starting to work. And now there's an ROI for them. If they come in early, they get equity, they can be on the ground floor. And when this takes off, they can actually get a higher payoff in the long run than their high paying job in the short run. So again, that's your job, is that you as a founder have to communicate that to your co-founders, that your idea is worth pursuing, and the best way is to show some traction there. So Montserrat is asking, in cost structure, why only put concepts and not the numbers? You over time have to get specific on your cost structure, but the reason that I tend to leave that to later is that it's very hard to predict to absolute accuracy what your cost structure is going to be when you don't even know which product you're going to build. So if you take this approach that I'm suggesting, we go off and first try to validate customers and problems, and inevitably the solution is going to change. I've gone from thinking I'm going to build product A to building product B. And so if I'd spent a lot of time trying to build a cost structure to great detail about product A, which might be maybe a physical product, and now I'm going to build a digital product, everything will have to be redone. So I like to think of cost structure more as stage-based. So remember, Lean Canvas is not a business plan. We're not trying to predict what's going to happen 3 years from now or 5 years from now. What we want to do is only think 3 months out. So I like to think the initial scope of the Lean Canvas, so you want to talk a big story. So you want to talk about a big problem worth solving. But when we do our planning, I only think 90 days out. So in 90 days, what traction do I need to show? What resources do I need? What team members do I need? Can I do it on my own? How much time will I need? That's what I think of. And if I can hit that milestone, I then revise my cost structure upwards. And if I now have to build an MVP, what's that going to cost? How long is that going to take? Can I go faster? Who do I need to bring on? So I'm thinking stage-based. Every 90 days, I'm reevaluating my Lean Canvas and then trying to think of it organically growing versus trying to predict everything that's going to happen in the beginning. To give you perspective, Facebook today spends billions of dollars, billions with a B, on their server hosting because they've got billions of users. When they were starting, it was $85 a month, right? So when you think of that scope, and that they grew like they were unicorns, so they grew very, very quickly. If Mark Zuckerberg had done a business plan back in his Facebook days, it would have been off by many orders of magnitude because there's no way he could have predicted, he said so himself, that he was going to have that cost structure even 5 years down the road. So that's just an extreme example, but it's the reason why I suggest people don't spend too much time on that. So I know we're almost coming up at time. There's a lot of questions left, but I'm going to maybe take 2 more, and then I'll kind of turn to Vijay to see how we're doing on time. I can stay, maybe a few minutes longer, but I'll do a quick check. But let me take 2 more questions, and then we'll do a time check. Let's see. So a question from Raj about key metrics versus business goals and targets. How are they different? So they actually are not different, but the reason we call it key metrics is that when people think business goals and targets, it's not very defined. So you can come up with many different ways of measuring business. In my second book, kind of pictured here, Scaling Lean, I only talk about 5, actually they're now grown to 7 metrics, but there are only 7 metrics that matter. And really it's a subset. You don't need all 7. For most businesses, you need 3 to 5 metrics. And we standardize around that. So just like the Lean Canvas is a model that helps to standardize around a way of thinking about a business, it helps to pick a standard. You may not agree with my 5 metrics, you may come up with your own, but the idea is to be consistent. If you are consistently measuring all your ideas against the same set of metrics, you can then figure out the ROI or figure out which ideas are worth pursuing. So in that second book, I introduced these 5 metrics and we have grown that to 7, but we don't use all 7, but that's a way of kind of narrowing that down. So last question, and then we can do a quick time check. So from Amit, is the riskiest assumption only one, or can it be many? So just by definition, riskiest means one. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will always be one, but your challenge or your challenge is to try to find what is that single domino to really focus in on. And sometimes you don't know the whys. So you may have a risk, which is so a very simple example is when I talk to a team. Some of you may be in this category, you've done all this validation interviews and you've got lots of insights. The question I like to bring to bear very quickly, as bringing it from an investor perspective or ROI perspective, is how many customers do you have? And if the answer is 0, then all your learning, all your insights, while good, is not enough. So I try to see how can you turn that into customer 1, not customer 10, not 10 customers, but just 1 customer. What's keeping you from getting 1 customer? That becomes the riskiest goal or the goal to accomplish. And from there, we might break it back into what might be the riskiest assumption. The reason you don't have a customer, maybe because you're spending too much time trying to finish your product. Maybe we can come up with a faster way of doing it. Maybe you're struggling with finding the right buyer. Maybe we need to focus in on that. So I don't know where that is, but I use the traction goal as a way to figure out what might be the obstacle that's holding you back. That's the constraint, the bottleneck, the riskiest assumption that I want you to focus in on, and we come up with ideas for moving you forward. So it's a bit of, if you're familiar with theory of constraints, it's a bit of constraints thinking. At any given point in time, there's always going to be one weakest link in your business model. And it's not always obvious, but you have to take some of this kind of thinking to figure out where is that riskiest, weakest link. And then from there, try to understand what are the obstacles. And that's where the riskiest assumptions kind of pop out from. So again, it may not just be one cause, but there's oftentimes one problem area or one root cause from where you can get many possible things that you can start to do to address. So again, we've run out of time, so maybe I can turn to Vijaya just to see. I don't want to kind of keep talking, just how much time we have.
Yes, thank you, Vash, for taking maximum questions as we could and seeing the time. So I thank all the participants for sending across these queries, and I will see to the best of my abilities and resources how we can have them answered and share it with you over an email. And also
Sure.
we'll be sharing the recording. And Ash, I must say that it has been wonderful having you here today. And we had a lovely number of audiences also. And I will be sharing a feedback link with all the participants. Kindly share your feedback with us as in how we can going forward make things better. And thank you, Ash, for your time. Thank you so much. And we'll reach out to you again and we'll see what.
Yes, and I guess, yeah, so given the number of questions, I'll just throw this out that if there is another opportunity, we could maybe next time even just do a Q&A session, given that everyone has been primed with the background. So if that's of help, happy to coordinate with you on that.
That's a great idea, Ash. Yes, we could do that. So I'll keep everyone posted and informed about the next course of action after this session. And for now, I think we'll log off. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you, Ash.